Hey, Facebook. Not in my car today because I am sitting here next to me as one of several screens. I'm watching the Energy and Technology Committee hearing focused on Eversource's response or lack thereof to Tropical Storm Isaias. And kept looking for a break in the proceedings to run a few errands and get outside, but that's not going to happen. This is going to be a long hearing. So I will try not to talk too fast, but I wanted to touch on, first of all, a little bit about that hearing, but also more generally about sort of a theme of conversations that I've had on several levels this week, a lot of which we talked about when I talked to Attorney General William Tong last night on Facebook Live. That has to do with the concept of a public good or something, a good or service that we believe that everybody in our society ought to have some basic level of access to. And it's important enough as a value that government steps in because the marketplace doesn't value that to the same degree and isn't making it, it's geared to other goals. It's geared to profitability. And we as a government decide that there are certain things that we want to make sure people have access to, even if they can't afford it, and even if it can't be monetized in the way things are in the marketplace. And that includes things like access to the ballot box. That's why we have all kinds of protections to make sure that you will be permitted to vote safely and securely. It also includes the Postal Service. I think we're watching a lot of discussion about that right now, that it's not a business. If the Postal Service were a business, it would be FedEx. It exists in the government for a reason, which is that we want to make that service, that connectivity between all of us, available to everyone. That's the same, it's for our utilities. We want to make sure people have access to levels of electricity and phone and connection to the internet, which I talk about a lot. It certainly relates to these hearings that are going on this week, for sure. I've started talking about this as the beginning of the accountability week for Eversource and some of our other utilities, but particularly the electrical utilities. And Eversource really is the one that really demonstrated a lot of failure to serve us appropriately. And so on Monday, there was a hearing in front of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority that was focused on the recent rate increase that we all saw in our July bills, with all kinds of misleading messaging in it. And we are PURA, as that body is known, is trying to unpack that right now. And they have some new leadership there, and there seemed to be some pretty strong pushback. So I'm hopeful. Many of us, including me, submitted testimony to that body to encourage them to rescind those rates. They temporarily rescinded the rate increase. We think they should do that permanently and consider more major structural changes to the way that it regulates that utility. Today's hearing in the Energy and Technology Committee is it's specifically focused on the storm response or lack thereof. So it's looking at some of the very specific things. And again, I submitted testimony to that, and maybe I'll put that letter in my newsletter later today. But there are some immediate things, such as making sure that Eversource makes some good faith effort to make customers, ratepayers, whole for the significant costs that they endured in terms of rotting food and all kinds of other expenses that people were forced to endure because of Eversource's utter lack of responsibility. And I say that they didn't. It's not just that they didn't restore our power, they didn't live up to their own plans. And a lot of that has to do with, or a chunk of that has to do with their lack of communication with local elected officials. I can't say how many first selectmen or other state or town officials that I stood next to during the aftermath of that storm who had no idea what was going on, and they're trying their best to help keep their residents safe and to make sure that critical infrastructure pieces were safe and preserved, and didn't, in some cases weren't even getting a single phone call from Eversource. So there are significant lapses in terms of communication so that towns can respond appropriately, just with knowledge of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Other failures, in addition to the communication failures, not just with first elected officials, also giving consumers, ratepayers, no meaningful ability to communicate service disruptions, being told repeatedly to access, phone numbers or internet services. First of all, that they didn't have access to those services, but also then they couldn't get through. That the absence of make-safe crews, the allowing local knowledge about, they have reduced the ability to draw on local retired officials, for example, who have knowledge about electrical infrastructure. So it was a very haphazard. Some towns were able to find retired officials that helped them understand, give information to the out-of-state crews about how the systems worked. But that should have been set up by Eversource, and apparently used to be, but it has allowed to be attenuated. They didn't provide backup power. There's all kinds of things. Much of this is included in a package called the Take Back the Grid Act, which has some immediate suggestions, but also some longer-term suggestions in terms of how we realign this public utility, which has access to a captive income stream from all of us who have no choice but to use their services, to define success the way we define success for ratepayers and consumers, and to make sure that when they succeed and they are rewarded for that, they are rewarded for the things that we define as success. So if you are looking to tune into that, you can watch it on CTN. I imagine it will go on for quite some time. There are, in addition to Eversource executives who are on the hot seat at the moment, there are also executives from United Illuminating later today, and then DEEP and PURA, that is, sorry, not to use acronyms. DEEP is the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and PURA, again, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. And some municipal officials will also be testifying, as well as regional energy producers, to try to bring the whole picture together so that, finger pointing doesn't point at the guy who's not in the room. So we're going to have to keep pushing for this. So I thank you all for the many of you who have told me your stories that I have used in my own advocacy, and there will be, we're going to have to keep this up, and there's much more to come, both in the immediate term and in the medium and long-term movement to make sure that this company serves our needs instead of their own. So thanks, and have a great weekend.